I used to be one of those people that had to have my New Year's resolutions or affirmations or whatever in place and concrete by January 1st. But a couple of years ago, when I had sick kids for the whole week between Christmas and New Year's, I realized how silly it was to put an arbitrary deadline on something that I was hoping to work on for an entire year. So I decided that the entire month of January is when I figure out what my new year will look like. That's why I decided to wait until a little bit later in January to talk about some personal development podcasts you might want to listen to as you figure out what 2024 is going to look like for you. I'm Andy Smiley, the Friendly Podcast Guide. I'm a mom who uses podcasts to fight the boredom and loneliness of motherhood and to entertain my kids when I need a break. And I want you to be able to use podcasts in these ways too. But it can be overwhelming to try and find a podcast you or your kids will enjoy in the thousands of shows that are out there. That's where I come in. Each week, I talk about different podcasts with topics ranging from parenting to pop culture and everything in between. My episodes are short and they answer your questions about the show, so you'll know if it's a good fit for you or your kids or not. Now, let's talk podcasts. The first personal development podcast on my list for today is The Lazy Genius. I've talked about this podcast before, and I'm sure that I will talk about it again. This is one of my favorite podcasts. Kendra Adachi is the host, and she has a big sister energy, but not in a I told you so sort of way, more in a I figured out some stuff to make your life easier, and I want to tell you about it so you don't have to figure it all out by yourself way. If you're looking for an episode to start with, I recommend listening to episode 347, How to Know What Brings You Joy. It came out a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. We'll link this episode and all of the episodes I talk about today in the show notes. The next podcast on today's list is called First Name Basis. This podcast isn't a general personal development podcast. This is a podcast if you want tools and practical strategies to talk to your kids about race, religion, and culture. Jasmine Bradshaw is the host, and she is an anti-racist educator who specifically helps parents and teachers navigate the situations and questions that come up when you're trying to help kids learn how to be inclusive and love those who are different from them. A great episode to start with is the first episode she created, called Talking to Young Kids About Race. It's a great way to learn about where to start when teaching your kids about being inclusive. And if your kids are older, her second episode is called Talking to Older Kids About Race. Before we talk about more personal development podcasts, we're going to take a quick break to talk about my guide to help you create a podcast trailer in less than 2 hours. Your podcast needs a trailer. It doesn't matter if you haven't launched your podcast yet or if you've had a podcast for 10 years. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I've heard that podcast trailers are helpful, but I don't have time to make that happen. That's where you're wrong. Making a podcast trailer doesn't have to take weeks. You can create a beautiful podcast trailer in less than 2 hours. And that trailer will get potential listeners to start listening to your show and keep listening. All you have to do is follow my step-by-step podcast trailer guide. Go through each of the 8 steps on the guide, and by the end, you'll have an awesome podcast trailer. Grab this guide in the link in the show notes. The next podcast for today is called Mindful with Media. This is another personal development podcast that is about a certain type of personal development. Alex Fales is the host, and she is a screen time researcher and media coach. Her podcast is all about how to use technology in a way that helps you feel in control instead of feeling controlled by media and technology. I've taken several courses from Alex, and every time I learn from her, I have so many aha moments. She's so good at helping me, and probably you, apply big concepts to my personal life. I actually got to do an entire episode all about Mindful with Media where I got to interview Alex and talk to her about her show. I interviewed her right after her show started, so it was really fun to hear about all of the goals and dreams she had for the podcast and get to know her a little bit better. She's just awesome. If you're looking for a place to start, a great episode is number 26, Stop Living Your Life on Autopilot. Alex dives into the power of questioning your beliefs and habits, even though it can be uncomfortable. In the episode, she shares 3 examples from her own life that are super relatable. The last personal development podcast I want to talk about for today is about progress. This is a great podcast if you are a recovering perfectionist like me. Monica Packer is the host, and she helps us focus on the progress we're making instead of perfection. Monica has several different types of episodes every month, like solo episodes, interviews, and shorter, quote, Dear Progressor episodes, so that you can learn in a lot of different ways. I actually got to do a whole episode about progress where I got to interview Monica and learn some fun behind the scenes of the show. If you want to learn more about it, you can listen to that episode. We'll link it in the show notes. If you're looking for a place to start listening, a great episode is 541, Regulation 101, What Your Nervous System Has to Do with Your Emotions. If you've heard the terms regulation and dysregulated, but you aren't exactly sure what they mean, I highly recommend listening to this episode. I learned so much about what regulation is and some practical tips for how to incorporate it into my life. Personal development podcasts are one of my favorite ways to learn about how to improve my life in a low-stakes way. Hopefully, one of these podcasts will help you improve your life in a meaningful way as we take on 2024. Also, if you've been putting off making a podcast trailer, but you know it's time, grab my step-by-step podcast trailer guide. Talk to you soon.